Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to give just a moment as people are coming into the Zoom. All of you here, Kim's friends, her family, and our grantees to celebrate Kim's life on her birthday, and also to celebrate the 5th year of the Kim Wall Memorial Fund. We're thrilled to bring together this year's grant recipients, who you will meet in a few moments, as well as our inaugural grantee from the fund. And as always, we're so honored to have with us here today Ingrid and Joachim Wall, as both the creators and the champions of the Kim Wall Memorial Fund. So welcome to Ingrid, Joachim, Anne, Astrid, and Charlotte. For those of you who are joining us today, and I see people are still joining, please take a moment and put your name and where you're joining from in the chat box so we can see all of Kim's friends and family from around the world who are here. And welcome again. We're going to start today with a short video to celebrate Kim's life and work before we launch into our program.
Hi, my name is Kim Wall. I'm currently in the middle of the Pacific on the Lady E, a Marshallese government supply ship, on my way back from Venezuela Castle, where I've been reporting on the nuclear waste site threatened by climate change. This is exactly the kind of stories I like to do, where I can combine on the ground, shoe letter reporting with the foreign policy lens. Hopefully carve out a space for myself in the male-dominated world that is foreign policy. Thank you.
Kim was an artist and a storyteller in every sense.
She seemed to be utterly and uniquely unafraid of going into uncharted territories.
She had wanderlust in droves, and it hung off her every word.
Kim had an infectious curiosity that was almost childlike in nature, full of innocence and goodwill.
She grabbed every opportunity she could. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Along the way, her life became an adventure.
The world through Kim's eyes was a rare and special perspective. She didn't shy away from tough questions.
My friend Kim wrote stories that transformed cultural anthropology into popular narratives.
She made going from continent to continent look like it was no big deal.
We complain often that journalism lacks creativity and depth, but Kim had so much of both.
She told human stories. In the same way she lived her life, she told them with grace, dignity, and joyous care for our shared experiences.
I remember when she told me about her upbringing. Both of her parents were journalists, and she had often accompanied them on small reporting trips. That's why she's so good, I thought.
Kim would have wanted more women out in the world, brushing up against life.
She gave voice to the weak, the vulnerable and marginalized people. That voice has been needed for a long time. Now it will not be.
So before we turn to today's program, I also just want to take a moment to acknowledge that at this moment, it's such an important moment for all of us to stand up for press freedom as we're watching the war in Ukraine and the brave journalists who are covering it. And I really just want us to take a moment of silence to appreciate all of those journalists who are doing this dangerous and vital work right now. Thank you. And now I am really delighted. We're going to turn to Kim's parents, Ingrid and Joachim. If you'll join me on video, hello. And they're joining us today from Sweden. Kim's parents have been so committed to growing the Memorial Fund, to make it a fund that will live forever, that will benefit countless women journalists following in Kim's footsteps. So Ingrid and Joachim, I am so happy to see you today. I wish we were together in New York celebrating Kim's birthday as we have in years past, and hopefully events next year will allow us to do so. But I'd love to start by having you share with us a little bit about Kim's life, her reporting, and her legacy.
Thank you, Nadine.
Thank you.
Today, Kim would have celebrated her 35th birthday. It will not be like that. We will never again have the opportunity to give her that big birthday hug. Instead, we celebrate her memory by awarding scholarships in her name for the 5th year. It's a circumstance that warms, that gives comfort to us. So far, we have been able to send out 11 young female journalists around the world to do the important reports that was Kim's hallmarks. We miss her every day, and she is always with us in mind. Right now, we especially miss sitting around the kitchen table here at home in Trelleborg and hearing her thoughts about what's happening in Ukraine. The war-torn country is so close to us, and many refugees have already come to our small town in their flight away from the war. The struggle for freedom of the press and free speech has perhaps never been more important than today. It's independent journalists who give us knowledge of what is happening in our world. They are guarantors of the truth far beyond what power despots want to let us. Kim stood up for free speech and for letting the little man speak as well. She told the stories that no one else found, the odd angles. We believe and hope that we have also found this quality in this year's fellows. We wish them the best long time to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here today to officially celebrate with us this year's awardees. As many of you on today's call will know, Kim was a beloved member of the IWMF community. She was a fellow and a grantee, and someone who we all got to know and to really respect in our time working with her. And the Kim Wall Memorial Fund was created for journalists carrying forward her legacy, young women journalists going out into the world to tell stories that perhaps were not being covered by the mainstream media, stories that looked at subcultures and things in a little bit of a different light in a really unique way. And we're very glad to have some of those journalists who are going to be carrying that legacy forward here with us today. As you mentioned, we have awarded 11 journalists since the launch of the Kim Wall Memorial Fund in 2018. And each year we will continue to do additional grant making in perpetuity because of the immense success in raising funds to continue and support the Kim Wall Memorial Fund. Before we turn to our grantees, I would like to just remind folks that we're going to have the opportunity to have a discussion at the end of our Q&A today. So please put any questions that you have into the Q&A box, and we will answer as many of those questions as we can. So first today, I'm going to ask Anne Hermann to join me on camera, if she will. And Anne, as you may remember, was the inaugural grantee of the Kim Wall Memorial Fund. And she published a book on the human consequences of Danish colonialism in Greenland with the grant that she received. And as a result of that work, there has been recent tangible action and in fact, an apology by the Danish Prime Minister. And I'd love to start by asking you, Anne, if you can tell us a little bit about what she reported on and how it contributed to this really pretty remarkable action on the part of the Danish government.
Thank you so much, Nadine, and hey everyone, and happy birthday, Kim. Thank you for inviting me. As an update on what came out of the first inaugural grant, I published this book in June last year. It was just before the 300th anniversary of Danish colonialism in Greenland. And the story is essentially a story about a covert colony, how Greenland went from being a normal colony to being a hidden colony. And it's about a generation of Inuit children forced to abandon their indigenous lifestyle and to assimilate to Danish culture. After World War II, with the birth of the United Nations, the international community outlawed colonialism, but Denmark was determined to keep Greenland in its grip. At this point, Denmark had ruled Greenland for more than 200 years. So in the decade that followed the signing of the UN Charter, the Danish government conspired to hold on to Greenland territory by misleading both the UN General Assembly and the Inuit population. In fact, the Danish government kept the new UN warranted rights hidden from the indigenous people, and it also misled the General Assembly by insisting that there were no distinct Inuit culture or ethnicity in Greenland. It also claimed that the Greenlandic inhabitants supported integration into the Danish state. And in this way, Denmark succeeded in convincing the international community that Greenland was no longer a colony. And ironically, as Greenland was recognized internationally as decolonized, this event coincided with what is probably the most damaging colonial period in Greenland at all, which is what I describe in the book. Now, the general impression of colonialism here in Denmark is that Denmark was an exceptional empire in the sense that it was exceptionally humane and a force of good. So when the book came out this summer, it received a lot of attention because of the expose that especially the archival work, the investigations of the traces of this process in the archives that I was able to uncover. The book has also been nominated for a Historical Book of the Year here in Denmark and for another journalism award. And the way the book is structured is that the archival research forms a narrative of this, you can say this political plot to hold on to Greenland by assimilating the population. But mixed with that are first-person narratives of people who as children experience this assimilation process on their families and on their own bodies. And one of these people is Helene Thyssen, who was part of an initial experiment with 22 children who were to be assimilated to Danish culture and language by being taken from their families in Greenland and brought to Denmark. And they were then supposed to be, for a year, supposed to be immersed in Danish culture and language and then sent back into the Greenlandic community to be a sort of front runner. The children were never sent back to their families. Some were adopted by Danish families under mysterious circumstances, and the rest, including Helene, ended up at a foster home in Nuuk and were not allowed to have relations with their families. Nadine, I don't know, I was asked to read an excerpt, so I've translated an excerpt from the book, which is So this is the chapter about Helene, and it's written in first person, as all the personal stories are. Excuse me. I found out that my dad was sick when he was moved downstairs into the living room. I was 6 years old. He got tuberculosis and was sick for a long time, but shortly after he was moved downstairs, my siblings and I woke up in the middle of the night. We were told to go down and say goodbye to my father. I had to kiss him goodbye and be a sweet girl. Then my sister and I were sent out into the kitchen because we were not to see them carry him away on a stretcher. We saw it through the kitchen window. They hadn't thought of that. It was very strange. At the chapel, we had to say goodbye to him one last time. It was very solemn and people were crying. My mother lifted me up so I could kiss him on the forehead. I got scared because my father was ice cold. I'll never forget that. A truck pulled the casket down to the old burial ground in Nuuk. They had dug a hole in the ground and my father was put into it. Afterwards, we all cried. My mother started working at the guest house. She began in the kitchen and then she became a waiter. After my father's death in the spring, 2 high-ranking colonial officials came to visit us with an interpreter 2 or 3 times. The Danes decided everything. It was still a colony. My mother was shy. We were sent out to play and they closed the door. They talked and talked, and when they had left, we asked what was going on, but it wasn't until their 3rd visit that we got an answer. My mom bent down and said that I was going to Denmark. The gentleman had said that. I asked what Denmark was, and she told me that it was a country that had something called trees and something called flowers. The flowers smelled good, so I shouldn't be sad. My mother comforted me by saying that she would sew me a new dress, and she asked what color I wanted it. I said, all colors. I loved the colors that appeared when I would play in a puddle with oil in it in the sunshine. So she made me a striped dress in all colors, and I also got a new coat and a small suitcase. My mother told me that other kids from the town were also going, and I consoled myself that I was not alone. The other kids in town were a little jealous, and I started to think that it sounded very exciting. Until I got on board a dinghy and was taken to a big ship full of other kids without their parents. It was really awful. The dinghy rocked, and I looked up at my mother and my siblings on the shore. Everyone was completely silent and waved. I couldn't wave goodbye. I was so sad and completely petrified. It was a very long boat trip. It took 14 days because we stopped in both Qakotok and in Pamiut. Several children came on board and we were looked after by a girl called Hansine from Nuuk. When we found out there was nothing to do on board, we played everywhere. We played hide and seek, and some of the boys were brave and climbed into the lifeboats and hid, even though we were not allowed to. My mother had said there were no mountains in Denmark, but when we arrived in the twilight at the port of Copenhagen, I thought I could see mountains. It was just a silhouette of trees. There were many people on the dock waving at us and a bus waiting for us. It got darker and darker, but we couldn't come down because we didn't know where we were going. We headed to Field, so it must have been a bus ride of about 1.5 hours. When we arrived, we entered a large hall with bunk beds. I was lying in one of the lower bunks and I could hear the other children start to weep under their covers, one after the other. I wiped my eyes with the duvet. So Helene is, this is just an excerpt of her story, of course, but Helene is one of the 6 children that, as Nadine said recently, received an official apology from the government, and initially the government refused to pay reparations, and then the children brought a civil suit, and the government a few weeks ago settled and decided to pay reparations 250,000 krona to each of the 6 children that are still alive from this. And when the prime minister gave the reparations, she also gave a speech that really, for the first time, I think, in history, acknowledged the dark side of the Danish colonialism. So there's beginning to be a counter narrative finally here in Denmark.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us, Anne. I want to just congratulate you on the book completion and the fact that your reporting has led to this remarkable outcome. It really just shows the power of what you've been able to do with this project. And we're so honored to have had a part in supporting you through the Kim Wall Memorial Fund. So thank you for sharing that with us today. And I am now delighted to turn to our 2022 awardees, who we have announced today and who are with me now. If we can have, first I'll ask Astrid Landon to join me if she can on camera. Thank you, Astrid. Hello. And so Astrid is a reporter and an audio editor and producer. She's based in Paris, France. Today she's joining us from New York. And she writes about mental health systems in the US and in France. She covers healthcare and also social issues. Her work has appeared in national media outlets, including The Guardian, Libération, Challenges, Le Monde, Are We Europe, and others. And Astrid will be reporting with a grant that she receives from the Kim Wall Memorial Fund on the right to sexual assistance for people with disabilities in France. Astrid, congratulations. We're delighted to have you here today. And I'd love to have you start by telling us a little bit about your reporting project and how it reflects the kind of stories that Kim gravitated toward during her career.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I want to thank especially Ingrid and Joachim for this opportunity. It truly means a lot. And the team at KWMF, of course, Nadine, Claudia, Charlotte, Taylor, there's other people as well I'm sure I'm forgetting about. And congrats, Anna, on your book. This is so poignant and incredible. So I just wanted to tell you a bit how I first heard about Kim. It was because I read the Marshall Islands story she published. And I was really kind of impressed by the reporting. She published it with 2 other journalists, and just generally her dedication to her craft and how like the depth of her reporting and how great her writing style was. She like had this sense of bravery and this adventurous spirit that I think is very inspiring. Spots in journalism is something that really matters to me, because usually looking at intersections is kind of like a modern way of thinking about journalism. And that's what I've been trying to do since I graduated from Columbia Journalism School and Sciences Po. So my project in particular is looking at, as you mentioned, the right to sexual assistance for people with disabilities in France. So in France, we have this kind of like very particular situation where prostitution, sex work is illegal for clients. So as a client, you cannot pay for sex, and you cannot, pandering is illegal. So you cannot put in contact someone who wants to pay for sex with someone who wants to be paid to have sex, if that makes sense. But people with disabilities, some of them have been very vocal about the fact that they want to be able, I'm talking about people with motor disabilities, and there's hundreds of thousands of them in France. They usually say, from the experience, they say that it's often very difficult to have a sexual life when you have a motor disability, because you're not meeting like a lot of, usually considered as one of my sources said, and I thought it was very powerful, you usually considered as something to treat and not someone to desire. And that can be very, hurtful in terms of like your mental health and even your physical health. So this association, in particular, the Association for the Promotion of Sexual Assistance, APPAS, has been since 2015 putting in contact sexual assistants, so people who provide sex, or not necessarily, if we want to get really technical, not necessarily the sexual act, but also assistance like masturbation and stuff like that. So they've been putting in contact sexual assistant with clients with disabilities, which is technically legal, which could be charged at pendering, but they do it very publicly and they've never been charged. The reason why is because there's kind of this gray zone when it comes to sexual assistance. Sex work, as I said, is illegal. But recently in 2020, Sophie Cluzel, who is the Secretary of State in charge of people with disabilities, asked the National Committee of Ethics to kind of look at this question and deliver a report on what they think should happen regarding the right to sexual assistance. So they published the conclusion in October 2021, a few months ago, saying they were against the legalization of sexual assistance. However, they opened the door to kind of sexual education / help that would be provided by the medical staff, which is like awkward for everyone involved because the medical staff is not trained to do that, and people with disabilities don't necessarily want to have like sexual intimacy, not sexual intimacy, but talk about sex toys and masturbation with people who are treating them, you know. It's also, when you think about it, a bit kind of weird to think that you would teach someone with a motor disability who cannot use their arms, for example, how to use a sex toy. So yeah, that's going to be what I will explore this story through the angle of women in this story, kind of the place of female sexual assistant, because most sexual assistants are women, but most clients are men, because there's still a big taboo in terms of sexuality when we talk about sexuality, especially sexuality when it comes to people with disabilities. One of them told me the issue is that we usually considered as angels, and angels don't have sexual desires. And mothers too suffer a lot from this situation, maybe more in a certain way or different way than fathers. So yeah, to wrap up, I think the situation in Ukraine, and I'm really glad you mentioned it, kind of resonates particularly today in relation to the fund, I think, which is about helping women journalists around the world, because I see a lot of female journalists going there, and I just want to take this opportunity to remind them that there's a lot of things going on that different organizations doing online, providing security training, which is really important. And the second thing is that Kim was a very brave journalist. And I think if COVID showed us one thing, is that you don't necessarily need to travel all around the world to find critical stories that need to be reported on. You can just do that. A lot of things are happening around you. And especially if you're a young journalist and you don't have a lot of financial flexibility, so you can't just like book a plane ticket. Believe me, there's so many things that are uncovered and happening right in front of you. So that's basically what I wanted to highlight. And thanks again.
Thank you so much. You would like for your audience to take away about the community that you're going to be reporting on?
Yeah, definitely. A big thing for me is that I think taboos are usually it's very comfortable for people who are in a situation of privilege to not talk about things. And it's very interesting that taboos, even though, because people often say, for example, in this situation, yeah, sexual assistance is kind of complicated because, for example, there could be like abuse and, you know, some things could happen. But we never really ask the opinion of people who are concerned by what's happening. And I really want to highlight the fact that if you want to find a solution, quote unquote, to a problem, talk to the people who are involved and don't assume, because some things end up hurting the people you want to protect. And I don't think it necessarily comes from a bad place or a place of, you know, I think sometimes people generally think they're doing a good thing by, you know, avoiding that subject. But it's 2022, we can talk about sex. Let's talk about sex for people with disabilities. Like, this is not uncomfortable and it shouldn't be, you know.
Amen to that. And it's such a Kim story, I have to say, just listening to you talk, I know that she would have loved to have seen your reporting. So thank you for sharing, and congratulations again on your grant.
Thank you.
Yes.
Happy
And now
birthday, Kim.
Yes, happy birthday, Kim. I am now thrilled to introduce you to our second grantee of 2022, Yi Charlotte Ming. And Charlotte, would you like to join me on camera? Hi, how are you?
Hello. Hi, I'm well, thank you.
And so Charlotte is a freelance journalist and a photo editor from China who's based in Berlin, where she's joining us from today. And her work focuses on underreported and nuanced stories in the themes of culture, history, and identity. She reports and writes in English and Mandarin and speaks intermediate German. And her writing has been published in Time, National Geographic, Atlas Obscura, World Press Photo Witness, Sixth Tone, 10 Cent News, and other publications. And Charlotte is going to be reporting with support of the Kim Wall Memorial Fund on the legacy of looting during Germany's colonial rule in China. So Charlotte, I want to start by asking you about your reporting experience, and specifically, I know that you worked with Kim on some reporting, and so I'd love to hear a little bit more about that experience and what receiving this grant means to you.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. And first, I just want to thank everybody, Kim's parents, Ingrid and Joachim, and everybody at the IWMF family for selecting me as the grantee this year. And I'm so honored to receive this grant because Kim was a friend and a colleague who I was very lucky to have worked with. And yeah, I'm also so excited to hear more about Astrid's project, because it just sounds really fantastic, and it's something that just fits so well with Kim's mission as a journalist, and something I think she would have for sure loved to report on herself. And yeah, I want to talk a little bit about my experience working with Kim, and then a little bit about my project. So I got to meet Kim in 2016 when I was working in New York, and Kim approached me to work on a story about a town in Connecticut that has a sizable Chinese population. And the people there were working for a few big casinos in the region, and these casinos also organize bus trips from New York's Chinatowns so that elderly people from there could go to the casinos and just spend the day there. And so Kim was the writer and I was the photographer and translator. And for a year, so whenever Kim came back to New York, and she was like traveling around the world at that time doing different reporting projects. So whenever she came back for a few days, we would take a 3-hour bus trip from Chinatown to Connecticut. And reporting with her was full of excitement and adventures. So I remember one time we went up to see this beauty pageant organized by the casino, which started around midnight and lasted till 3 in the morning because they wanted to keep people there overnight in the casinos. And then afterwards, we being freelancers with no support on that story, we just found a random conference room and tried to sleep on the carpet. And in the US, you always have this full-blown AC, so you can literally freeze to death there. And in the morning, like I think 3 hours after, we were swept out by the cleaning lady. And so reporting with Kim is always fun, and she just had such a great energy as a journalist, and she always wanted to talk to everyone, visit everywhere, and she wanted to leave no stones unturned. And she always gravitated towards characters who are independent women, who are elderly people with a lot of stories, who are those people who are underdogs. And she was generally very happy spending her time with them. And I learned a lot from her because at that time I was mostly working in an office environment, and I would do my reporting on the phone usually. So going out with her and doing the underground reporting was really an experience. And unfortunately, we never got to finish that story. And it's something that remains unfinished in my heart, I would say. And this is, I feel that why this grant is so important for me, because I feel that I can now use this project to continue Kim's spirits and her legacy. Colonial presence there, which was about a century ago. And around that time, Germany and 7 other countries, including the US, the UK, and France, waged a war against China after Chinese peasants rebelled against foreigners in the country. And in the fallout of the war, soldiers from these countries, they plundered the Chinese imperial palace, and many museums in Germany and the world took advantage of this chaotic period and enriched their collections with very little money, with a lot of things that were stolen from the soldiers. And many of these objects, they are still exhibited across Germany today. And this history is mostly forgotten by people. And I myself come from Qingdao, a city that was a former German colony in China for 14 years before the First World War. And very few Germans know about this history. So, and also this museum's research is taking place at a time when institutions across Europe are being forced to confront this history, their history in colonialism. And many of Europe's most prestigious and well-known museums, such as the British Museum and the Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands and the National Museums in Berlin, and many state museums, many university museums, they have a huge amount of objects looted and stolen from former colonies, and sometimes even human remains. So yeah, and so far, these museums have been showing these items without telling the visitors the full story. And discussions and efforts on provenance research and restitution of objects have so far mainly focused on objects from former African colonies, and very little attention has been focused on China so far. So I will follow the museum's researchers as they look into the history of their artworks and see what these museums want to do about them, whether they want to return the objects to China, when they're sure those items are stolen, or they want to keep them in the museums, and how do they want to display them in the future. And I'm also going to interview their Chinese partners and experts over there in China about this history and see what people there would like to see happen and what these objects mean for them, for the country. And yeah, for me, I think the story is well suited for the Kim Wall Fund, because Kim she had such a strong sense of justice, and she always wanted to use reporting to address historical wrongs and injustice that we still have today. And she also lived and reported from China for a few years, and she had such a great love for the country. And so I also think that the story would be something that Kim would be very much interested in telling as well. And I'm very excited to start reporting on the story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Thank you for sharing that, and also for sharing your personal experience of knowing Kim and working with her. What do you hope for this reporting? What would be for you the impact that you want to see as a result of your story?
Mm-hmm. I think first of all, I would really love more people to know about this history, because it's not really being talked about in the West at all. Like I myself came from a former colony of Germany, and when I introduced myself here, being someone from Qingdao, people have no idea of where that city is and no idea that this history ever happened. So first of all, I think I want to make people aware that this colonial history happened, and that it still has a huge impact on today. And so many objects are still in the museums today. And I want to make people aware that museums are institutions that produce knowledge. And so far, people always have taken the information we see from museums as neutral, but that's just not true. So I want visitors to be aware of when they go into the museums, they are aware of what they're seeing, and they are aware, and that it make them want to ask questions. It make them want to maybe give pressure to museums, and so we can really just a historical wrong today.
Thank you. Well, we'll look forward to following your progress, and congratulations as well on your grant award. We're so happy to be able to learn more about your work today. If everyone can join me on video, I think we will now turn to some open discussion and questions, and just really enthusiastic to learn about all of the amazing stories that are going to come about as a result of the Kim Wall Memorial Fund. So I see that we do have a question in the Q&A, which is around the sort of difficult nature of both of these stories, and how you feel, if you've ever experienced difficult moments when you're reporting and wondered if you should continue reporting the story, and how you sort of persevere through that difficulty. I don't know if any of our three grantees would like to tackle that first.
I guess I'm gonna go. That's actually a great question, and thank you for asking that. I think not so much on this story, on other stories definitely, because I've been reporting on the mental health system, and I'm actually really, really big in, talking about journalists' mental health and kind of what's been done. The Dot Center, for example, does a lot of things that are really, really cool to help towards that. But yeah, definitely there's times where, like there's situations, for example, like traveling to the other side of the world is just like not something every journalist would have the courage to do. But I also think that there are a lot of stories that you report on that are mentally very challenging. And contrary, I often say that as journalists, we don't have like, like it's not like doctors or therapists who are trained to hear like some terrible stuff. We often hear stories that are very, very complicated to kind of process and very draining sometimes. I don't have an answer as to like how to navigate this. Therapy, that's my answer, honestly. But yeah, for sure it's difficult. And when it comes to like, I guess like the second part of your question being like the reaction from other people, I was quite surprised because I reported on like electroconvulsive therapy on children with autism before, which was like a thing I thought like I would get a lot of backlash. It hasn't been published yet, but that was like a difficult story to report on. And then when I reported on like COVID healthcare workers who died of COVID, that were like the two main stories where I felt like very drained and potentially kind of afraid that there would be like repercussions. But I would say that most of the time, what you think is going to happen, you always expect the worst from like people in terms of like the response. And for me, it's not so much the response from the from people who are reading, but more kind of like the trust that people put in you, like how people, your sources trust you. And that's like a very heavy thing to carry, especially when the stories are pretty, hard to go through.
Thank you, Astrid. Charlotte or Anne, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I can add something about my story. I think the first challenge, of course, is me speaking only intermediate German and researching this whole project in Germany. And a lot of the historical documents or academic research are in really high level of German. So I think I'm constantly just trying to better my German and looking at the documents myself, and also sometimes with the help of different softwares and even with Germans who can, help with translation and sometimes with interviews, because there are sometimes people who would like to be interviewed in the native language instead of English. I think another challenge for me is that just the nature of provenance research, tracing the history of objects. This is something that's really complicated, really time-consuming thing. And of course, in the academic circle, they also works a bit slower. And so also they need to, trace the history of objects from over 100 years ago. And when Germany suffered, they're the aggressor, but they had 2 world wars here. So a lot of the documents were destroyed. Also, actually, a lot of the stolen stuff, they maybe didn't even have the documents in the first place. So this becomes just difficult to pin down. And I think but this is part of the story as well. And this work of confronting history, I think, takes a really long time, a lot of work, and a lot of. I think this, I can hopefully make this challenge part of the story. Yeah.
We admire your tenacity in confronting history. And do you have any thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, it's actually, Charlotte, I think, put it very well. I found myself in this process facing some of the same challenges. And of course, it's very time consuming when you go to the archives and have to trace what happened, because you have to piece it together yourself, and what you think the story is when you start might turn out completely different, which of course happens in a lot of reporting. But I found that it was difficult to know exactly what I was looking for in the beginning. It took a very long time with the archival material before I started to know what was relevant and what wasn't. So in the beginning, I would just record everything. And then you start, you have to be pretty far in the research to know what the key events are, or which details you should really take note of. And that was challenging. And then I think also the interviews, for me, it was very challenging to travel around in Greenland because of the nature of the country, and none of the towns in Greenland are connected by roads, so you have to fly or sail. And so, for instance, going to a small town to do interviews, I would have to take the boat that delivers the mail, like old-fashioned mail, and it would go to this small town once a week, so I could come and then I could stay a week. That was the minimum I could stay, and I would have to find private people to stay with, and that was challenging, but also very interesting. But that was, for that reason, it was incredibly important to have the support of the foundation, because it was such a costly trip as well, because of it being so difficult to make the trip. Yeah.
It's just incredible how the variety of stories that we've heard about today, and how each of them is bringing some really tangible and unique aspect forward. I want to turn back to Ingrid and Joachim, as you are the creators of this fund. You have made these stories possible, and also you've been the selection committee. So I'd love to hear from you. Any words about why these stories in particular stood out, and what you hope for the reporting going forward of our grantees?
It wasn't easy. Even this year, it's always a very long process when we are trying to find out the right ones. Because if in the best of world we had given out 100 grants every year, but we think that these two stories this year, they were different journalists and 11 different stories. So I really think this is a great way to honor Kim's legacy.
Yeah, and I think the stories are exactly what Kim would have done and liked to do. So I think we made a great choice of them, and congratulations for all of us. And I wish you all luck with your work, and we are looking forward to see, hear, or read what you're coming up with. And if you need some help in any way, just take contact with us.
And stay safe outside in the world, because today it's a different world, unfortunately. So stay safe. No story is worth risking the lives. So.
And thank you very much for Anne for your comment this year. It was touching. I got tears in my eyes when you read it, and I hope you will be published in English as well, and we are looking forward to that as well.
We will do our best. So thank you very much, and good luck to all of you, and to all the one outside there that hasn't yet received this Kim Wall Memorial Fund grant. Try again later this year, because we will be there, and we will handing out new grants every year for as long as we live, and for much longer than that. So keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. And I think that's the perfect note for us to conclude on today. So once again, we will say happy birthday to Kim, and congratulations to our grantees. And thank you all for joining us and for being a part of this celebration today. Have a good afternoon and evening, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.